Doesn't mean you caught the warm heart either.
Well, I figured, is it for circulation?
That's what it means. I've been out of circulation for a long time.
No, you're not. That's not true.
I've got to watch what we say with that.
Yes.
You're on right now.
Yeah,
Want me to turn the camera to you?
I've been off for years too, so I was out of circulation. I've been off.
I'd be happy to turn it directly at you.
Slow circulation.
Well, let's see.
No circulation.
You make sure it's working.
That's like halitosis is better than
That's right.
Uh-huh. Yep, we're on. Okay. Says we're live. Let's start with the prayer. Let's jump on in. Got a little ways to go today. We begin with prayer. Gracious Lord, on this beautiful day, we come to you and to your grace again and pray that it might cover us this day, this week, especially be with us in this class as we seek to gain insight into your son Jesus and into his relationship with Simon Peter. Help us, Lord, to be as good of friends with Jesus as Simon Peter was. We ask this in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. Well, this one is entitled Confusion at the Final Meal. And we'll be looking at a section of John chapter 13, verses 6 to 10. I kept verse 11 in there. And then as bonus, you have two bonus sections. Bonus is the meaning of the foot washing. That comes after. That's verse 12 and following of John chapter 13. And then bonus section 2 is from Luke 22, a dispute over greatness. So we'll look a little bit at those as well. This day that we're looking at, the final meal of Jesus, is the beginning of, I think you would agree, it's an extraordinary day in Jesus' life and the life of his disciples. It has to be an extraordinary day. It's quite amazing, actually. And Jesus sent Simon Peter and John to make the preparations. You can read this in Luke 22, so I'll read that for you. Start at verse 7. When the day of unleavened bread came, when the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed, Jesus sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and make preparations for us to eat the Passover." "Where do you want us to prepare it?" they asked him. "Listen," he said to them, "when you've entered the city, a man carrying a water jug will meet you. Follow him into the house he enters. Tell the owner of the house, the teacher asks you, 'Where's the guest room where I can eat the Passover with my disciples?' Then he will show you a large furnished room upstairs. Make the preparations there." So they went and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. Now, the interesting thing, I guess, that we don't usually talk much about is that since these folks were Galileans, they celebrated Passover in the tradition of the diaspora community. The diaspora, those who had been scattered through the world previously, what they did is they actually practiced the great festivals. They would practice it a day before the actual date in case their calendar somehow got messed up or something like that. So it's interesting. Sorry, my ear's beeping at me. I mean, I'm dying with the battery. So if I don't hear you well on the left side, I apologize. Didn't bring batteries down with me. So this is interesting because when Jesus and his disciples are celebrating Passover on Thursday night, everyone else in Jerusalem is making preparations on Friday. And so the insight is when Jesus is sacrificed on the cross as the Lamb of God, that is the time when the Passover lambs for most of the people there are being prepared and sacrificed at the exact time. And that's because in the diaspora community, they generally celebrated these days a great festival days, a day early to make sure they didn't mess up. This is interesting. I guess we don't usually talk about that. I remember hearing that before and we're just going, okay, whatever. But it makes a lot of sense here that on the same time Jesus is being sacrificed, the lambs for most of the community there would be sacrificed at that very time. And so Peter and John are doing all of the preparations. They're fixing that carousel. Have you ever had that, by the way? Have you ever had a Christian Seder meal? You know, the carousel is the ground apples, raisins, almonds, cinnamon that symbolize the mortar of ancestors and all. And so they would have chosen the lamb, had it certified and all. Now, let me ask you a question. So do you think his disciples made any connection between the lamb they purchased that was being sacrificed and Jesus having talked about that he was going to suffer and die and rise again? Do you think they made any connection between Jesus and these lambs? Fred's shaking his head no. He thinks no.
That's what I was going to say too. I
They
don't
were
think
oblivious to so many other things.
Do you see a connection now looking back? You can see the connection looking back, but when you're experiencing it, they didn't fully understand all that stuff, so it went whoosh right over their heads, right? Mr. Tim.
Right.
I think there's great significance to that, and I until you just said it this morning, I never.
Well, we can stop class today because there's one insight, so we're done, right? One insight for customer? No, sorry. Good. Now that's an interesting one, but I think it's quite important.
The name of the sect, I never heard that name before.
Caroset? Oh, okay. Charoset. Caroset, yeah. It's did you do a Seder meal
We
here?
had it right here.
Did you have the mixture,
Yeah,
that
all
stuff? I had, for a period of time, when I was in Bethesda, I had a Jewish secretary. She was from a Reconstructionist form of Judaism, which I'm going to use a label, left and right. Right would be conservative, and left would be liberal or whatever. And so this is probably from the left-hand side. The Reconstructionists were the ones who came up with, there's bar mitzvah, there's also a bat mitzvah now, and they're the ones that came up with that. But she invited Cindy and myself to a Seder at her home, and so it's quite interesting. So we had it there, and I discovered that some of the foods that they ate there were not my favorites. But that's okay. Anyway, so it was an interesting experience. Okay, so these two disciples were the ones responsible for arranging the furnishings and everything, getting sure everything was ready. Now it's interesting to think Jesus chose Simon Peter and John to do this. Simon had kind of comes across as a leader of the disciples, right? But now he's being placed in a place of serving the disciples. How do you think he might have reacted toward that? That's putting, since it's what you think, it can't be wrong. So do you think he thought that was the best thing that he could do? Or was he kind of put out that Jesus was asking him to do a servant type role?
It could even be that Jesus used him to show the others that the role he was in needed to be different, if I'm making any sense.
Well, Jesus as leader is doing it in different ways as well, right? That he will, the whole point we're getting to today is ultimately washing of feet. That's the role that a servant does. That's not what a leader does. It's not what a rabbi does. That's instead what more of a menial task. And I wonder, maybe, just maybe, Jesus gave Simon Peter some of these tasks to do to help prepare him for that day, for that night, because a lot of things are going to happen. And I think, this is just my opinion, I think that he put him there in the role of a servant to prepare him for what's to come. Matthew tells us that when Jesus began the meal, he predicted that one of them would betray him. This is from Matthew 26:21. While they were eating, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, one of you will betray me." What do you think that did to the meal at that point? What do you think that did? We usually just kind of rush over that, right? But put yourself there. Would you be looking around wondering who it might be?
Yes.
Can you imagine that? And so this is how they begin this meal. It's going to change, I think, how they experience it.
Well, I would think they would also
I'm
ask,
sorry?
I would think they would also ask, what does that word mean?
Well, that is asked later on, right? That is asked, and finally Judas Iscariot will ask, is it me? And Jesus says, yep.
I don't think they can have any conception that the crucifixion is going to follow within 24 hours.
I would agree with you there. I think they also didn't figure out who the person was who's going to betray Jesus, because I don't think he would have made it out of the room. I mean, if you all knew this guy's going to betray Jesus, you would stop him by any and all means possible, I would think.
But we also know what the betrayal is. And when you say the word betray, my pastor betrayed me. I asked him to do this and he wouldn't do it. I mean, they could have thought it was something much simpler than what it turned out to be.
Okay. So still, you're arguing for a continuing misunderstanding of what it's all about. Okay. Well, let's move on. Think about, apparently a table would be sometimes it's actually shown as a big triangle. They're laying on these couches, kind of usually on a left elbow, apparently leaning in towards the center and eating in this way. And it appears that if you try to reconstruct who's where, that Jesus is on his left in like this, and John is here on his right, which is, a right-hand man and all of that type of thing. It says in John 13, one of his disciples, the one Jesus loved, was reclining close beside Jesus. Isn't it interesting that John never uses his name, but he always says the one Jesus loved? And I wonder if the other disciples, well, since this is the last gospel written and he's going to be the last one alive, maybe he can get by with it. They might say, hey, he loved me too. What do you mean? Type thing. And this is the place in Jewish circles that would be the place of honor. And it appears, it's argued by many that Judas is on his left-hand side because he's going to, place the bread in at the same time of Jesus, so he's going to have to be close. And this is called the place of the intimate friend, is what I've read. And so Jesus can dip in at the same time he is. That's in Mark 14, you can read that. Jesus said to them, it is the one of the 12, the one who is dipping bread in the bowl with me. You would think they all would have seen that, or at least they could have been. But if Judas is there, where, the question is, where's Simon Peter in all of this? You would think that he would be in the place of the intimate friend. And I wonder why he's not there and what. Maybe this is part of the lesson Jesus is trying to help him learn about. I don't know, but it's interesting that the one who will betray Jesus is the one who's in that place of the intimate friend. Could it be that would have been Peter's normal place to be? Could that be a lesson, another part of the long, day-long lesson that Jesus is giving about serving? Some suggest that he's the one that's running around making sure everything is done correctly, but then I would raise my hand and say, well, what about, beeped in my ear again. What about John? Because he also was supposed to help. Why is he able to stay there and Simon Peter is not able to have that same situation? Mr. Tim.
Would Jesus be inviting each one separately where to sit? Or would they take that place on their own?
I don't know. I would just make a guess. I don't know. I wonder if there were. Think they had usual places to sit?
Did they sit often like this? Weren't they usually just sort of picking up things as they went along? And eating while they walked, then.
Well, but in a home, they would eat. If they would eat a meal together, it would be in a similar way.
At
This is
somebody
the-
else's, like
this
at
is
Zacchaeus'
This
house.
is the normal way of eating at that point. So apparently, it actually is better than sitting upright to eat. It's supposed to be better for your digestion. I've read someone actually wrote that up as a part of their doctoral dissertation. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not. So I think we should all test that out. You should throw out your tables and get dining couches and try it over the next year and see how well that works for you. But isn't it interesting that the famous picture of the Last Supper, they're all sitting and they're all on, it's like they were posing for the photo, the painting, right? Everyone sat on that one side, and that's not exactly how it is. So anyway, okay.
On that business of why didn't they know, because he was dipping his bread in the oil. But haven't we said several times that there were no articles in the original? So the
No. There are sometimes.
There are sometimes. So it really
there are
does say
articles,
the-
indefinite and definite articles.
So that's what I was wondering, because if it just said one who was dipping, maybe two or three were dipping at the same time. But that's not true.
That would be that's fairly. That one is clear.
Okay.
The most famous one is the not use of the word "the" in front of Son of God.
Okay.
Surely this is Son of God.
Gotcha.
That's probably the most famous one, and that apparently there has been proven to be that the is assumed there.
Okay.
I didn't do that study either, but I can't imagine doing that. It'd be a lot easier today in the era of computers than doing it by hand, going through all of those texts by yourself. So let's see. So we don't know exactly where Peter is. He's able to motion to Jesus. We see that in John 13:24. Ask him which one he means. And so maybe he's moving around. John's in a place. Okay, we already did that. Luke tells us at the end of the meal, an argument breaks out as who's the greatest. That's actually on the third page that I gave you. If you look at that just for a moment. This is the dispute over greatness. This is after the meal. Then a dispute also arose among them about who should be considered the greatest. And this is apparently a fairly regular argument that they have. But he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who have authority over them have themselves called benefactors. It is not to be that way among you. On the contrary, whoever is greatest among you should become like the youngest, and whoever leads like the one serving. Now we can see Peter serving there, can't you? For who is greater, the one at the table or the one serving? Isn't it the one at the table?
Yes.
But I am among you as one who serves. There are those who stood by me in my trials. You are those who stood by me in my trials. I bestow on you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed one on me, so that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. I am among you as one who serves. When I was growing up, I guess I was in high school at this time, we had wasn't a pastor, I forget his exact title. He wasn't youth, he was, I don't know exactly his title. Jay was his name, Jay Moosevelt. And Jay composed music. And so one of the pieces he did was on this text. And so there would be this line that I got to sing this line, whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be least and whoever is least among you must be slave of all. So we sang that to the whole thing, and then another part came in, and all of these things were coming in and going out. And I remember singing that and going, that's an interesting text. And I have to see if we could find that sometime, because that's a good one to use in this. But I am among you as one who serves. And so Simon Peter is learning about service this day. John tells us at some point in the meal, Jesus rose. Maybe it's after who's the greatest. I don't know. It could be. It would seem to fit there. But what's interesting is how many places do you find out about Simon Peter and washing of feet? How many of the Gospels? It's a number between 1 and 4.
One.
It's 1. Yeah, and so interesting, it's only here. And again, anytime that something is unique like that, it always makes me wonder why. I don't know why, but it makes me wonder why here, why not? Why didn't Mark include it? If that's Peter's gospel, why didn't Mark include that? I don't know. So they talked about greatness, and now Jesus shows greatness. You can almost call this a living parable, couldn't you? He gets up from the table, he takes off his coat, he deliberately wraps a towel around himself, around his waist, he fills a basin of water, and they must surely be wondering what he's going to do, not guessing what he's actually going to do. And so this story, called the washing of the disciples' feet, could probably be called the washing of Simon Peter's feet. I mean, everybody gets their feet washed, but the only one who says anything is Simon. Those are the only two characters that are listed. For example, let's look. Verse 6. The he is Jesus. Jesus came to Simon Peter, who asked him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Just a point of word, because the word we'll run into down below, nipto is the word for wash, and wash for nipto is usually used for a part of the body type thing. That becomes important later on. It's interesting that the word order is you, my, wash, feet, the feet, so it's the emphasis is put at the beginning. You're going to my feet wash type thing. And so the emphasis is kind of, the answer should be no, you shouldn't be doing this at all. And yet, this is what Jesus is going to do. It is inappropriate for Jesus to do this. This is servant work. This is slave work. This is not master, rabbi type of work. Because in Simon's viewpoint, actually in all of their minds, the Messiah would not suffer. That's not something they thought that Messiah would do. He would never submit. He would never serve. And by the end of this day, Jesus will have done all three of those things. So what does Jesus say to him? What's verse 7 add to it? Why do you think that verse is so important? Jesus answered him, what I'm doing you don't realize now, but afterwards you will understand. What is Jesus trying to do there, do you think?
Prepare him to think about it. Once the whole terrible thing was starting, then Peter could think back on it, maybe, and start to understand.
Okay? It's a tough day. It's going to be a tougher night upcoming. You don't know. It's interesting. You don't realize now. It's kind of like Peter again says something that maybe he wished he couldn't have said. I don't know. He seems to do that pretty often. None of you ever have done that, right? Said something and maybe wanted to not say it afterwards.
Well, I would think that verse also applies to Jesus' entire 3-year ministry.
Okay.
Because as I read the Gospels, they're always amazed. They don't know what to expect from Jesus.
Okay. I think that's fair. And so this, on the last night, they're with him kind of, is to be almost expected. Expect the unexpected.
Well, everything doesn't fall into place for them, as I see it, until after the resurrection. I mean, then all of a sudden,
Well, and for some of them, I think you could make the argument it's not until after Pentecost that everything comes together there, I think. So, yeah, maybe that's a beginning. But afterward, you will understand. It's interesting when afterward would be. You don't understand now, but you will later on. Interesting. And Peter then takes another step. He says it even more vehemently. You will never wash my feet. You will not do this. Interesting. Peter is saying no to Jesus, right? How many disciples can you remember ever said no to Jesus? Besides Simon Peter.
None.
He's the only one, right? He's the one that says no. And he does it here. Interesting. Only one to ever say no. And Jesus is showing them that he is going to be a servant Lord. In essence, Peter's saying, no, this can't be. This isn't who you are. This is not our expectation, going back to what you said, of what a Messiah should be or is. Jesus is not fulfilling their understanding. He's fulfilling his own, which is God's way of doing it, of course, right? But Jesus did that all the way through. Let's see. He embraces sinners, right? And the Pharisees say, what you're doing, you shouldn't be doing. That's the wrong thing to do. He reaches out to prostitutes. He touches lepers. He touches the dead. Everyone says what you're doing is inappropriate. And Jesus continues to do that. And I think he's trying to show them that their understanding of appropriateness is incorrect. That God's idea is different and much, much different. Jesus replied to Peter, if I don't wash you, you have no part of me. That's interesting. Part is a share or something like that. So it's like you're not part of of our group. You're not part of my ministry if I don't wash you. I don't know. Jesus is asking Simon to submit in humbleness, in humility. And Simon is saying what Jesus is doing is inappropriate. And this is difficult for Simon because Jesus is doing something. And we have to think about it. Not too long ago, he saw Jesus being transfigured as showing some of his glory and might and everything. And now he's showing servitude, something completely different. I mean, it's almost like the exact opposite of being great and mighty, and now he's acting as a slave, as a servant.
This is after Palm Sunday. And remember when he rode on a donkey and people put coats down? That was humility too, wasn't it? Do you think they were still expecting him to be a king? And
yes, but
that was
when
different.
the king would ride a donkey, he's coming in peace.
Right.
If he'd ride a war horse, he's coming in the opposite. So he's still coming as king,
Right.
but is showing a little bit of the humbleness of king. I'll agree with that part, but no, I don't know. I think it's still, Jesus is still not meeting their expectations. He's something different than they expect. And Simon Peter especially having trouble with what Jesus is doing. So much so that verse 9 says, well, don't wash my, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. So basically wash my whole part. And that's where the verbs become interesting in verse 10. The one who has bathed, that's luo, to bathe, to wash, that means to wash the whole body, does not need to wash, that's our friend up above, nipto, to wash a portion of it. Anything except his feet. But he is completely clean. Completely clean. Clean completely. It's two words there, to be pure and wholly pure. So it's wholly pure, completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you. And of course, it's interesting that if what we believe is correct, the person in the position of that friend is the one who's the unclean one, who is going to betray Jesus very, 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 very soon. I guess technically he's already betrayed him, right?
Yeah.
But the living out of the betrayal is coming quickly. So this is serious stuff that Simon Peter is doing. Jesus' point is that if Simon Peter denies the humility of he as a servant savior, he can't possibly take part in what Jesus is doing. Until he submits to who Jesus really is, how can he be one of his disciples? I think it's a tough day, and it's a tough night for Simon Peter. And I think it started off by being one of the two to set the place up, and probably then it seems like to help make sure everything's going well. And now Jesus is going, maybe this is what Simon Peter should have done, to wash the feet when they come in. Maybe that's something he should have done and was unwilling, unable to do. Maybe he's still upset that John is having that place right next to Jesus, being the right-hand person, and he's not there. He's not almost on the outside of all of this. Let's see, where was I going?
It's interesting that Peter didn't pick up, but afterward you will understand, and why he wouldn't have asked, well, what do you mean by that? That was quite a say, you don't realize now, but after you will understand. What do you mean?
Well, Jesus goes immediately to try to help them understand. If you look at that second page, this is what followed immediately after. Jesus explains it, starting at verse 12. When Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer clothing, he reclined again and said to them, "Do you know what I have done for you?" The answer would be no, we don't. I know you washed our feet, but why? He's going to explain it here. You call me teacher and Lord, and you are speaking rightly, since that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should also do just as I have done for you. When I was in this little church in Indiana, we had a member who had grown up non-Lutheran. There are people that grow up non-Lutheran, I guess. And I forget what his religion was, but it was interesting. And I mean, he's Christian and all, but they had different emphases. On Maundy, Thursday, do you know what their emphasis was?
Washing
It was
feet.
foot washing. And so every Maundy, Thursday, that was foot washing. I remember in a confirmation class, we did confirmation different there and tried different things. And so the kids came, this was on a Wednesday evening. I can tell you that by Wednesday evening, there are smelly feet. Because at Wednesday evening, it was the pastor who went around and said, please take off your shoes and socks. And the pastor wrapped a towel around himself and went and washed feet. It was quite interesting to watch people. And it was, you should not wash my feet. And so we used some of the same words. You know, if I can't wash your feet, you have no part in this class. And some of them probably would have said, good, I'll leave or something, right? But it was almost, I don't know if I should use the word a holy moment, but it felt like a very God moment at that point, because something unique was happening there. And we tried to express to them what it meant to be a servant, to serve in ways that people did not expect. And this fellow told me that that's what they did on their Maundy, Thursday evening. They would do washing of feet all the time. Miss Lynn.
Well, I just looked at those two verses, 14 and 15. And when Jesus 2 times says you ought to wash each other's feet and you also should do as I've done. I could use one of those little squares over here with ought and should.
Oh, sorry.
I just mean it seems strong. And we pretty much ignore it. You know?
So is the question, should we be literally washing feet because Jesus tells us to wash feet?
We literally do lots of other things. When I say it's figurative,
That's why I ask you the question. I ask you the question this time.
Just saying, I'm just bringing up a discussion. I'm not answering the question.
Oh.
I'm just saying, when Jesus commanded us to do other things, we as Lutherans and Christians try to do those things. This is something we don't even try, and we don't even think about. And I've heard many discussions and many sermons on it doesn't literally mean wash feet. It figuratively means to serve others and do dirty jobs, and we do plenty of those for other people, and we do plenty of cleaning and serving and doing things that you wouldn't think you would be doing. So I understand that part, but I wonder how we can decide, and we've had this discussion before, that then you say that's figurative. And then there are other things I say, that's figurative. You say, no, that's literal. So how do we as human beings decide what is figurative and what is literal? And especially when it's strong, like I'm showing you an example and you should do the same thing. How much stronger could it get? But why don't we? That's all I'm saying. I'm not answering the question. I just like to discuss it.
But they discuss that in the concordance here too. It says, some Christians believe Christ intended to institute washing. Most Christians, however, correctly interpret Christ's action as providing an example of humble service. So it's like, you wash my windows. I'd love to have you come over and humbly wash my windows.
Pastor,
Yes, ma'am.
when I attended the church in St. Michael's, the first 8 years I came down to the shore, they had a foot washing experience, and I thought it was extremely meaningful. I can't remember what I did, if I did or didn't, but I just remember seeing people take their shoes off, and I just thought that was really good to think that way, because Jesus was talking to us about that. And you're being humble.
Yeah, we've done it here. We did it on the platform in front of the altar when Pastor Kevin and Ann were
And Ray did it, Ray.
Okay, well that's basically
But that's the only time I remember.
Right.
Well, what I'm thinking is, because I've been taking these wonderful lessons from this rabbi, and we're going through the Old Testament this way, and it occurs to me time and time again, we're talking about Moses, and Moses told him this, and then he knew he was going to die, and so then he said, oh, well, wait a minute, I got another rule to give you. And, because he knew them, and he knew what they were like, so he tried to really structure it. And going back to riding the bicycle, when do you let people go and start doing it on their own? Well, if I'm doing it on my own, I'm going to look for a need. And if your feet aren't dirty, that isn't my need right now to serve you, whatever it is. So I think that sometimes in working so hard to decide what we need to do, we go back to law and we don't think about our intent for it.
I think,
Yeah, it's easier. It's easier just to follow a law.
I think this whole episode could be a metaphor.
Good.
And it starts with verse 7, where Jesus says, you don't realize it now, but you'll understand. He's talking about washing your sin away by dying for you.
Yeah.
He's not talking about dirty feet.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I think the whole thing could be, they don't understand. So when he dies, maybe the bell will ring in somebody's head. But, oh, this is what he was talking about. He gave his whole life. How humble can you be? And it's the washing is a metaphor of washing away your sins. Or, you hear about people washing in the blood of the Lamb. Well, who's going to wash with blood? I mean, it's all.
Yeah.
To me, it could be that. In addition to be a servant, I mean, that's a practical, day-to-day illustration of what you should do. But I think that there's also that bigger meaning. Could be.
Because, one of the curious things, and you said it again, he says, afterward you'll understand. You think somebody would say, well, what do you mean afterward? After what?
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Tim has something, it appears.
Many years ago, Sally and I were invited to the Brethren Church, and on Thursday, and it was an experience I'll never forget. Washing
experience?
Did you wash feet? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Okay, so you wash feet as well, so it was not someone else just doing it to you.
no. And I had never met this man that I was washing his feet, and yet there was a bond or I don't remember his name. I wouldn't know if he walked in the room, but there was something that really transpired there. It was very humbling.
Did he wash yours and you washed, was it a pair?
Yes.
And so everybody washed somebody's and then that person washed?
It was very, very humbling.
I was involved in a similar thing in Tanzania, where we washed the group that went. Everybody washed somebody else's feet.
In the group?
In the group, yeah. They would give us whatever, and we had sat in a circle, and there was a bucket of water, a bowl or something, which we passed along. So I washed the guy's feet who was sitting to my left. He has now a pastor, by the way, being so. So I washed his and then passed it to the next guy who washed mine, or the person who washed mine, all the way around. So that was, pretty meaningful to all of us who were there joining Jesus.
So maybe there should be, oh, that'd be fun. I'm just thinking out loud on live stream. That's probably not smart, but okay, whatever.
No.
Maybe there should be part of service or maybe pre-service. At X period of time, you can come and we will do washing of feet. You can wash someone else's feet and something like that. Maybe that to give that as an option. I guess I'm thinking of how you do that in a service. In the way in which our sanctuary is set up, that would be very difficult. I'm just thinking of practicality and all. And if you do it in a room like this, you would have much more options of moving things around and moving people around.
I don't think having done it once, it'll be any more meaningful the next time. So I wouldn't want it part of the liturgy. Personally, or I wouldn't be the one doing it.
Maybe we could just have it as you wash, come in, we squirt your feet down. Sorry, that'd be good.
No.
Sanitizers then.
No, where that sanitizer is,
Foot
you
sanitizer.
step in that tray at
Oh,
the
yeah.
bottom of it, you just give it a
Stick
few
your feet
squirts and stick your feet.
Now we're getting silly, okay.
Cast off your
Okay.
sandals.
But you
No,
know,
it's something for you to think about. Maybe it's something to think about. How would you do that? How would you choose to do that? There are going to be people who will choose not to participate.
That's okay.
It's just as when we commune, we have people choose not to participate. So however it would be done, you would need to provide a way out, if you will. So it'd probably be better as something before the regular part of the service. That's just, like I said, I'm
and
thinking.
you know what, if people aren't used to it, I don't think there'd be very many people in our.
Yeah, I can
Yeah, I can.
second that when we've done some unusual things in the past of, I remember offering during, I think it was during the season of Lent, that saying, if you would like to, you could come early, the pastor will be in the sanctuary, and you can come for private confession. You know how many people I had do that? None. Because nope, we're not doing that. But I can tell you that the many years I've done this, I think it's twice now, I've actually had. There was a fellow that came to me, talked about he had a sin that was bothering him. He had been forgiven, he heard it, and it didn't, I don't know the word to use, it didn't stick. Forgiveness didn't stick for him for some reason. And I said, well, it's in the hymnal, there's this little thing that has a little short individual confession part. I said, why don't we go in the sanctuary? Nobody else was there, just he and myself. Well, and God, of course, but no other human being was there. And he said, kneel down at the communion rail. He was able to do that. So we said the few words, and then there's a place where it said that you can then verbally express what you did. And so he did that. And as he did, he cried. And this was not the type of guy who usually cried, for things. And it touched him deeply. And something about, then the pastor's supposed to say the words there, but something about the setting and doing that actually broke that, whatever hold that sin that had been forgiven still had on him. And it was very powerful. So I think individual confession is, and when it's done in that way, I can't tell you what he said. That's against the rules, and you don't need to know. And people want to know that stuff. So, that would be a possibility. So, I don't know. The whole thing about doing this would be very interesting. But look at verse 16. You see, it's in the context that Jesus is talking about. A servant is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Jesus is trying to emphasize to the ones who kept trying to figure out who is the greatest, who's the most important. I think part of this whole discussion is, you're looking at it the wrong way. The one who is the greatest is the one who's the servant, who serves. That's why Jesus is so great, because he freely gives his life as an offering for all. The other part, we should look at that now. On the second one, the one from Luke 22, if you look at verse 31, this is part of this night as well. Simon's difficult night, we could have entitled this, where Peter's denial is predicted. Well, everybody talks about that, and Peter doesn't want to talk about that, I'm sure. But look what it says here. Simon, Simon, look out. Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. What does that mean?
Who did Satan ask?
Sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, that your faith will not fail. And you, when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. What does Simon say? Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and to death. Big words.
Big words.
I tell you, Peter, the rooster will not crow today until you deny me 3 times that you did know me. But think of this night. What happens? They go out to Garden of Gethsemane, right? When people come, what does Simon Peter do? He's the one that takes out the sword, right?
Yeah.
And he cuts off the, no, you did it wrong, man. You did it wrong. It's this way. Because the word that's used, interestingly, it is the little ear, i.e. the earlobe that is cut off. And so it's coming this way. Why would you go this way at someone?
To kill.
That's going after, that's trying to kill the person. Simon was willing that night. He took up a sword. So part of what he's saying here is true. Yet, when confronted, when in that courtyard, I almost said courtroom, excuse me. When in that courtyard, what did he do? I don't know. He's trying to be like a spy, right? Just find out what happens without being caught. Oops, it's not going to work out very well for him at that point. So, sift you like wheat. It's an interesting word phrase. To see what you're made of, huh? And try to see, because you're going to fail, Simon. But Simon is restored after this. What is the Alexander and the very horrible, very bad day? Ever read that book?
Yeah.
It's a children's book. He's going to Australia, right? Maybe that's what Simon Peter wanted to do. Go to Australia, type thing. But after this very bad day, he will be restored. Remember, he will be restored. He will learn more about what it means to be a servant. It's interesting. I do not think I can tell you of another place where it talks about washing of feet than in this one text. It does not talk about it in the epistles that I can think of. Anyone think of a time? If you find one this week, let me know. But this is the one time it talks about foot washing. It's interesting that it's not the one time it talks about communion, though, is it? So I wonder what the difference is, why.
Well, there's one other time where the host doesn't wash his feet, but Mary does with her hair.
Oh, right, with the perfume,
Yeah.
with the perfume and the hair.
Because he said to the host, you didn't even wash my feet when I came in.
Well, that's already happened before this.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay. So, where do you think Simon is on his walk with Jesus as this evening goes? What do you think he is? What do you think he thinks about his relationship with Jesus at this time? It's a tough spot. Jesus is doing unexpected things again, doing things that he doesn't understand again. Later on, you will understand. I'd like to understand now, but it's not time yet. Maybe they couldn't. Well, I think Jesus is pointed toward the cross, and he has to get there. That's what his emphasis is on. And I think that after the cross and the resurrection, then it all starts to fit into place. It's going to take some out, and they're going to have to understand that, yes, he is truly risen from the dead, because there's a lot of, we're not sure, it's the women saying that, and they're not reliable and all of that stuff. I don't know. Interesting. What would you have done if you were in Simon's place? Would you have said this to Jesus if he's coming around washing feet? Would you have let him wash your feet? Or would you have said, you shouldn't be doing this? Would you say, I'll do it instead? You notice that's not what Simon says. Stop washing the feet, I'll do it. He didn't say that.
That's good.
I never thought about that part before.
I would have said, I'll do it.
That's right.
I know I would.
I
know
don't
you
think
would.
I would. Because I was in a church in St. Michael's for quite a while, and they washed feet there. And I was impressed with the humility and the meaning of doing this. Coming from a Lutheran family with umpteen Lutheran ministers.
They didn't wash feet, huh?
No, they
They
never
had dirty
talked about
feet
that.
all of those years. Oh.
But this was a new experience for me with such meaning about forgiveness and, and I thought that was wonderful. Not that I needed to have my feet washed, but
Well, we've been meaning to tell you, Doris, that I can tell you though, on a Wednesday evening at about 7 o'clock, middle school kids' feet are not the most wonderful place to be at. It was also interesting. We had two adults working with us at that point in that setting, and they were surprised to get feet washed too. And they said, you shouldn't be washing my feet. Kids were just kind of sitting there, what? Then it took them a while to figure out what we were doing. So confusion at the final meal. Let's see if there's something else. Clean completely, I got that part about being washed. Well, that's what I have for this session. Do you have anything else? Other than that, looks like we'll be done.
Peter didn't, when he said, Lord, he told him, I'm ready to go with you to both to prison and to death, but he didn't know what was coming.
Didn't know what was.
I mean, he didn't know what was going to happen.
the next thing.
I think it was a tough day for Peter. He had to act as a servant, setting the whole thing up. He's the leader of the disciples. Why should I be doing this? And then he doesn't get a place close to Jesus at this meal. This is the big meal, right? I mean, this is the once a year biggie. And instead, there's John on one side and Judas Iscariot. What's he doing in the place of the friend? I should be there. I think all of that's going through him. And he's going, this isn't right. And he's right, it's not right. But that's the point. It's not right. It's going to be right because Jesus is going to die and make it all better. And I think it's tough for him to figure that all out. It's so countercultural. Oh, there's a fun word I don't usually use. It's so different from the culture and the expectations of what a Savior, a Messiah would be. You are the Christ, he had said. That's saying something pretty big about him. He'd seen the glory. He'd seen it all. riding in on Palm Sunday, all of this. And now Jesus is acting as one of the lowest. This is what a slave does. That's what the slave does. You know, many times when we translate it servant, we should probably translate it slave, because that's primarily what it is in that setting. And that's what he was doing. Slaving for them. That's interesting. Slaving for Jesus. That could be an interesting theme. We're closing with prayer. Let you go on your way then. We'll close. Gracious Lord, help us as we look at the confusion on this final meal to open our hearts and lives to you. Help us, Lord, to think about washing feet, what that would be like, to see if that's what you would like us to do as a sign of servitude among us. Help us to see how Simon's heart was touched and how it's ultimately transformed by your grace, mercy, and love. And when we come to those points where we have confusion and don't understand, much like our friend Simon, help us to look to you in faith and hope and trust. So bless us as we go our way this day, we ask in Jesus' most precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention.